we go along, but I'm going to get right to it, and I'm going to introduce the moderator for today, who in turn is going to introduce Jan and Nya. So Lama Mugabo has a master's degree in community and regional planning from UBC. He is a founding board member for Hogan's Alley Society. As a community development planner, Lama worked as a community organizer for the Carnegie Community Action Project in the downtown East Side. He was instrumental in spearheading the work that Hogan's Alley Society is doing to support tenants of the Nora Hendricks Place, a building that prioritizes Black and Indigenous folks who are unhoused. Please welcome Lama.
Thank you, Candy, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important conversation. I'm delighted to introduce two of our finest artists who are going to be in conversation with us this evening. And I'm glad to introduce John Wade, a local Vancouver artist who has an extensive career spanning over 30 years. Her most recent local show, Soul Power at the Vancouver Art Gallery, draws upon her diverse art practice with work that includes sculptural objects, mixed media, paintings, and drawings that reflect upon her mixed cultural heritage and lived experience as an African Canadian. Then we have Nya Lewis Williams, an independent curator, writer, and artist who has a community-based hybrid practice that encompasses discourse around the Black experience. She is currently MFA candidate at OCAD University and works with leading arts and cultural institutions across Canada. Now, before we begin, I want to draw your attention to the fact that today, April 7th, is the beginning of a 100-day commemoration of a horrendous tragedy that happened in my home country, Rwanda. And I want us to remember this day. And also I would ask you to observe a minute of silence. But this is for the 28th year, Rwandans and Friends of Rwanda worldwide reflect on tragedy that occurred in Rwanda in 1994. In 100 days, more than 1 million people were slaughtered for no other reason than the fact that they were born Tutsis. Every year, we commemorate by remembering innocent lives lost. We continue to work harder in rebuilding the Rwandan society so that their lives were not in vain. The government of British Columbia issued a proclamation, and I'd like to cite, it says, the International Day of Reflection on a Genocide against the Tutsis is an opportunity for British Columbians to reflect on the historic injustices while raising awareness about the many forms of racism, injustices, discrimination, and hate disproportionately suffered by minority communities. And I'd like now to invite you to observe a minute of silence in remembering lives lost. Thank you. Thank you for that. And now I'd like us to begin with a conversation where I'd like to ask each of the artists to speak about the art projects in the community. What is it like for you making art, curating, and doing community work in Vancouver? What are some of the challenges that you face that are specific to Vancouver? And do you ever find that sometimes you are censoring yourself because of the spaces you're working in?
Who shall go first? Should I dive in?
Please do.
Okay, well, since I am quite a bit older than Nya, I have been around the old Vancouver art scene quite a bit longer. And I guess I specifically moved to Vancouver in about 1983 and just kind of unknowingly sort of became part of, at that time, a young Vancouver art scene that was really thriving because Vancouver was a very affordable city. Mm-hmm. It was really cheap to rent apartments downtown. There was tons of studio space downtown. And so we all just kind of managed to converge together and we're really experimenting because I have to say at that point, we were quite young and even though, I mean, you go to art college, but really you can graduate from art college and know nothing about being an artist, really.
True. Yeah.
With the real world, the everyday real world of being an artist. I mean, that's something I think every artist that's part of the journey. That is what every artist kind of has to come to and figure out for themselves. But the wonderful thing about being in Vancouver, then I worked my first job was working in a coffee shop that doesn't exist anymore. There was no Starbucks. There was L'Espresso di Zanata. And on one shift, Stan Douglas was the coffee guy and Mina Totino, his partner, was the food person. And on the other shift, I was the food person and Roy Arden was the coffee guy. And so because it was also the only espresso bar in Vancouver, lots of artists and musicians would come and hang out there and we would talk amongst ourselves. And we kind of ended up having some of our first shows on the wall of the coffee bar because, there we were all day staring at this long empty wall. And then finally, I think we looked at each other and said, hey, we should have a show on the wall. But everybody was in the same boat. We didn't really know what it meant to be an artist. We were all very creative in our own ways, and we all kind of intersected. There was a great live music scene here also that kind of was really hooked up with Seattle and the rest of the West Coast, really. So we all just kind of helped each other with our music videos and our paintings and our clothing that we were wearing and the different scenes. And slowly but surely started to figure out how to be creative, if not how to be artists. Now, the real problems kind of came later when I, as an artist, realized, well, I'm having a lot of fun here. I mean, the party is fantastic. I'm having such a great time. But what do I want to say? Do I have anything to say? And now that was a much longer journey. And also once you start on that journey, there was an actual group of artists of color that eventually got together and realized, well, we not only have something to say, but we can't find a place to say it in. Because at that point, there was a complete glass ceiling. I mean, artists of color, not very many artists of color were really being shown, or what was the interest in their work at that point? People, it's like even now you talk to people in Canada and it's like, oh, you're Black and you're an artist. Well, when did your parents come here? Well, only did my grandparents came here, and there have been Black people in Canada since before Canada was Canada. We aren't new. And this goes into the whole lack of education. Like, we're erased in history. So how can we be present in history? You know what I mean? How can we be present in the history of our own country that has erased our history or does not acknowledge our history? So that was, this group was called the Ming Kwan Panchayat. It was formed by lots of people like Paul Wan, Dan Claxton, Shirley Bear was also a member, Lillian Allen. It was kind of like, went all across Canada. And it was a whole group of artists that were really trying to challenge that notion of where do artists of color belong and where can we actually express ourselves as Canadians of color. And I suppose, you know, at that point, I kind of thought that was like the end of my so-called art career because it wasn't really accepted very graciously or well. We kind of like went into this thing and stirred up a hornet's nest, and then kind of like you thought, oh, well, I'm not going to be an artist because nobody's going to take us on. They just look at us as trouble. So that's kind of like the beginning of my art career there in a nutshell.
Thanks, John. Nya, I mispronounced your name. I think I said Nya in Rwanda. I would have said Nya, but how do you pronounce your name?
Nya.
Nya. Okay.
Yeah.
Take it away.
I got lost forgetting that I was a panelist listening to Jan. Just because I just feel like I can listen to her all day. She's like a wealth of knowledge, and it's always so interesting to hear how Vancouver has changed or not changed. And I think it's particularly interesting for me. I consider myself like a daughter of the work and efforts that Jen's kind of era put in.
A well-loved daughter.
In that, you know, Jan went to OCAD, and now I am a graduate from OCAD from a similar program, and you know, I'm with Dr. Andrea Fatona, and so I'm literally a creative kind of offspring of the type of artists and women of color and Black women that Jen would have been creating with Vanessa Richards and others. So yeah, some of the challenges have not changed. Some of the challenges have not changed. We're still at odds with, as Jen said, the historic erasure of Blackness. Sometimes there's a willingness to acknowledge one type of Blackness, but not a willingness to acknowledge the multiplicity of it. Sometimes, you know, and so as we come to Vancouver from these various different spaces, as we always have, you know, been anywhere from being sixth generation Canadian to Victoria Salt Spring settlers, to myself who's Afro-Caribbean, to yourself who's Rwandan, like, you know, as we come to this city in so many different ways, the like imagination of what a Black Canadian look like has not expanded, and so therefore our creativity around how we like mark our presence and the conditions of our art aren't necessarily expanding. We're still making art about enslavement and about displacement and about identity and about representation. We're still having these conversations, and they're conversations that like I'm very happy to have, but I'm sure all Black, maybe not all Black, but the artists that I've been like lucky enough to have as colleagues and curators are attempting to, yes, represent these undesirable histories, but also push for centering our voices and our own perspectives in the way that we create, so that we're not constantly acting or reacting in despite or in spite of the way that white violence, you know what I mean, creates itself in this pervasive way, that we're not always just responding, that sometimes we're just like living in our skin. And I think the biggest challenge for me, which is kind of the ethos of the show, Where Do We Go From Here, that I curated for the VAG, was again tackling this mythology of Blackness. Like, if we spend our entire lives proving to you that we've been here, we're wasting so much time. We're missing out on great art, right? We almost missed the opportunity to hear Jan Wade because the VAG had never shown her work. We almost missed out the opportunity on, you know, these artists that have sculpted and created what Vancouver's art scene looks like, and then we discarded them because they're artists of color, right? That's the truth. So and we're still doing that, right? There's still no visible marker of Black presence in Vancouver. There's still no visible central hub of Black cultural production in Vancouver, right? We'd have to go to Ontario, and we'd have to go to Montreal to get the type of community support around our art that we deserve, right? And I mean, yeah, when it comes to censoring myself, I think I'm less worried about censoring the work and more worried about making sure the invitation is clear. I think we are just starting to have a couple of artists and curators being brave enough to say, I curated this for Black people.
Mhm.
And whether or not other folks understand it is not my priority.
Right.
And then, of course, the response is, there's not enough Black people in Vancouver for you to curate for Black people. Of course there is. And if only 20 people see the show, which obviously never happens, but even if only 20 people saw the show, they came in and the writing and the art, the language, the critical language around the art was coded with Black people in mind. And that's just, that's how I'm trying to navigate. And so, yeah, challenging, but not wanting or willing to allow those challenges to kind of censor the way that I create, because there is enough of us here. And I'm only interested in the work that kind of like elevates and, you know, makes room for more, like creates this like generative process of give and take within our kind of diasporic communities. So yeah, I mean, that's how I come to art making and curating. And I think so far, so good, I guess.
And in fact, we don't have to have a critical mass of Black people to have Black art. And I remember way back when I was a student at SFU, we invited an illustrious African thinker who coined the Black. He was asked, Blackness. Why do we teach Black history when there's no critical mass here? And he said that knowledge is pivotal. You don't have to have Black people to teach Black history, to teach Black art. In fact, non-Blacks can actually gain quite a bit.
I think so.
And so this idea that we don't have Black people, therefore we shouldn't teach Black history, we shouldn't teach, it's wrong. And I think we're robbing non-Blacks their right to learn and grow. And if they don't learn and grow, we're always going to face this cycle.
Yeah, it's also nonsensical. My mother was born and raised in Trinidad post or pre-independence and was reciting God Save the Queen. There are no British people in Trinidad, and we learn British history. So if we only teach history based on who's there, then we have some work to do. So this idea that we don't teach Black history because there aren't Black people, except that Black culture is everywhere. And so we're being impacted by it. We're using it, consuming it, and sharing it back out in ways that I think we still haven't really dealt with, right? Things that people do on their day-to-day basis, songs that they're singing, hairstyles that they're wearing, that they don't attribute to Blackness because they have no point of reference, because we aren't teaching Black history, because we decided there's not enough of us, right?
I mean, Black culture is huge in North and South America and global. Globally, it's huge, Black culture, and so why not understand what it is you're looking at and what you're emulating and what you're taking on? Why not understand where it came from and that it is actually here and what it means? And well, that's very funny, because when I was in public school, we still had the Union Jack, and I remember singing God Save the Queen every morning. Bless her heart, but
yes, yeah.
Oh boy, the royal family, they're going through a time right now.
Yes.
They're waking up and going, oh, hey, wait a second. They don't want us in Jamaica. Hey, wait a second.
So the next question looks at Black, Indigenous, and people of color BIPOC. And sometimes BIPOC have multiple lives in that they have to deal with various identities in order to get by in society. So how do you find that you're able to move through the different spaces that you do? And do you find that that it can be a challenge to make the shift?
No, I don't find it a challenge at all, because my whole life, that's what I was trained to do. I mean, I've had to do it my whole entire life. So why would it be a challenge? I know, I know when I walk into a certain place, this is how I have to be. I know when I go over here, this is what I have to do. I mean, this is what I was trained for my whole life in this culture. So I would say for myself, nah, it's not so much of a problem, because that is my lifelong training.
Right, right on. Nya?
I would say the same. It's not a challenge for me. I think it's almost always more of a challenge for the other people that have to come into contact with me. I was raised by Rastafarian parents for the most part. They are extremely militant, and so yeah, we are reciting Marcus Garvey, and we are Black Pride, and so I'm like just very immersed in my own kind of culture and histories and knowledge, and I think that can be extremely intimidating for people that assume a Black queer woman in a space is going to code switch or make herself small, and when you don't do that, it becomes more challenging for other people to receive me. So I don't find it to be particularly challenging, but I also acknowledge that I have access to various things that help me to move through, spaces that other people don't, like, having an MFA, having access to language, being able to speak what, we might say is like artistic jargon or eloquently, or, any of those things that I can put on and take off whenever I want, that allows me to have access in those spaces.
That's true. We do belong to a privilege, sort of.
Yeah.
Part of the privileged stratosphere in our world, at least. It is very true. I mean, we both graduated from OCAD, so
yeah. But I don't know. I don't find it challenging to make that shift. But I also think, like Jan said, we just maybe not like you said, but I just said I refuse to do it. I refuse to do it, and then I maybe deal with the consequences, and I'm sure that my life would be impacted positively should I not choose to navigate that way, and should I choose to be a little bit more or to assimilate. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me moving to Vancouver, because I'm Toronto born and raised. I didn't have to assimilate in Toronto. I could go in any space and there would have been Black people already there. Here I'm the first at almost everything that I do. So maybe that is just the challenging part.
Now, this next question looks at organizations. So many arts and culture organizations have many history of system inequities and oppression. How can these institutions be leveraged to subvert structures of power? And how have you been able to negotiate to get what you want?
Oh boy, that's a mouthful, Lama. Well, again, I've been here since like 1983, really 1984, really kind of out in the downtown art scene. And I mean, I have to say, when you've been around long enough, what you see is just the same thing going around, the same thing, the same 10 people run everything, the same, I mean, in the end of the day, it's about, I'm sure people sometimes are genuine about really wanting to help the cause and really wanting to further the plight of Black people and really wanting to lift them up and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, people don't want to either lose their power, and you kind of see this. I have kind of joined and quit so many organizations. I don't join organizations anymore. I just don't. I have work to make, I mean, the youngins are going to have to take that on, because I'm tired. I am too tired, because, the change is supposed to happen and something happens. Even my show, I look at it and I go, well, it's fantastic. I'm so delighted and so happy. And hopefully, the kids are going to stand on my shoulders and get lifted up. But on the other hand, it's like, wow, it's 2022 and I'm the first Black female artist offered a solo show at the Vancouver Art Gallery. It's daunting mentally a little bit. It's a little daunting because, I've been here a long time and you do see the good intentions and you do see people really coming together and trying to make the change. But then at the end of the day, the people that have the power want to keep the power. So, it's just sort of like sometimes it's like a hamster wheel, it feels like. So it's frustrating, I'd say. It's very frustrating at this point. I'm kind of hoping it's going to be a change, a real change. But again, at the Vancouver Art Gallery, God bless their hearts, the only other people of color I see are the security guards.
Man, yes.
I mean, you really feel it when you walk in there, and God bless them. They were all just lovely to me. They were all just lovely to me, but really at the end of the day, we're talking real change. And that's the thing that's really got to happen now. It's real change.
Let's talk about projects that are coming up for you. Are there any publications or shows, any community projects that you're working on? And if you care to share those with us, John, I know you have a big one coming up. Share with us, please.
Well, I have the book that's being produced by the Vancouver Art Gallery, and that's a big one. Essays by Wade Compton and Deanna Bowen, two artists that I really admire a lot and have really, Wade basically, birthed me and brought me up on the Hogan's Alley history. And, so when he was, just trying to get a little historical plaque for years, that man sought historical plaque. I was just out there, talking people up and talking, whatever Wade would tell me about the history of Hogan's Alley, then I would start to try to learn more, but really just kind of trying to have his back and talking to as many people about the history of Hogan's Alley as possible. And, so God bless Wade. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. And then Deanna Bowen, who's also just a monster, just a beast in her chosen profession. She is like relentless and brave and, so intelligent and so funny and interesting, and she's really, really trying to really, open things up in terms of the real history of Black people in Canada, So, and Dinah Agaitis, who I went to the first International Art Biennale in Johannesburg with in 1995. So yeah, Dinah and I had quite an adventure. I should actually just write a short story about that whole trip that Dinah and I were on, because it was pretty amazing. So these are the people that are going to be doing the talk next on April 12th.
12th, yes. Really excited to see that. Yeah. And Nya, what about you?
Oh, did you want me to respond to the question, or you just want me to tell you what I'm up to?
If you have any upcoming work that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I am opening an insufficient record, which looks at the photo ethics of preserving Black Vancouver at the Grunt Gallery on May 18th. And then later in the year, I'm at Burrard Arts, I think in November, with a vinyl installation work that I'm doing called In Excess of Representation. And that's I think in November.
Wow. See, Black History Month is not just February, it's 12 months of the year.
Well, that's because Black history is history, not just Black history.
Oh, there you go. And I must say that Nya did an amazing job with Sankofa.
Beautiful.
I hope you guys were able to check out that show at Museum of Anthropology at UBC. Really great work. And we hope we can see more of those shows. And also see the work that Black artists can actually do here. So great job.
The show, it was fantastic. And I chatted it up so much. I just invited the whole of Vancouver to go see that show several times, because it was just delightful to see it there. And everybody that went to see it was so impressed.
There's so much in it, so much information. And I think
interesting and engaging, and congratulations, my friend. You're doing fine work.
Awesome. What's your biggest hope for Black representation in Vancouver's arts and cultural organization? If you could make anything happen at all, what would you like to see happen in these spaces or a particular space?
Well, you know, I mean, for me, I would like to finally see Black representation, Chinese representation, Japanese representation, Ukrainian representation, whoever is, you know, I would just like it to be representation. I mean, Canada is supposed to be this big multicultural melting pot, but, you know, I mean, so why does it have to be so rarefied? Why does it have to be so special? Like, it just should be there. Naturally, just accept it and be there as a natural, in the natural course of things. Because, you know, well, yes, as we were just saying, Black history is just history, and it is part of the history of this country as much as anybody else's history. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there shouldn't be kind of like one just special group that gets the lion's share of everything, because there's a lot to go around, and it should go around, you know?
Nya?
I think I'm a little bit less hopeful and more, I'm a little bit of a skeptic. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
I would be more of a skeptic, and I think I'm more of a skeptic.
I'm trying to be pragmatic. I'm really working on it, I promise. But the truth is that, you know, I have to say that I'm sure, Jan, you were having these conversations, you know, and they're not new, right? They were happening. You know, we sat down the other day, and Jan shared that Jan shared that she was the only Black person in her cohort at OCAD, and I am the only Black person in my cohort at OCAD, and are we 40 years apart?
Well, I went to OCAD from 72 to 76.
Okay, and I am
only Black person at OCAD. Besides, there was one African student who came and did the fashion illustration course, or Tally, her name was, and it was like two Black people in a white school, just like we were like that, right?
Yeah, it's just you know, yeah. So myself and Dr. Andrea Fatona in curatorial and criticism, and like, you know, and so I'm a little bit skeptical because, you know, I really think that part of the challenge of representation is the willingness to forget that we've already had this conversation, to forget that our parents experienced racism, to forget that they have done this work already, to forget that Hogan's Alley Society was started in 94, right? That this is not new. Yeah. Right. And so part of my piece, and, you know, I didn't get to answer the other question, but like representation and that type of work is about sacrifice, so that Black people are not constantly bearing the brunt of the emotional labor of reminding you every generation that this happened. We're also the only people who have ever been legally enslaved on these lands outside of Indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. So with the same effort that it takes to erase us, we have to work with that same level of vigor towards representation. That's why, for me, it can't just be passive, right? It has to be a very strategic and meaningful type of reconciliation towards Black history, because the level of strategic erasure needs to match the efforts to repair it, right? I don't know that Eastern European communities have faced that type of history on these lands. So therefore the reparations don't look the same, right? And so we see what is possible in BC. We see with historic Chinatown. We see in Victoria with, you know, plaques that are acknowledging genocide. We see what's possible. And for some reason, the cycle keeps missing Black communities. So that's why I'm just like, hopes. My hope is that Black folks are strong enough to continue this work, regardless of whether other people come around to acknowledging truths about what's happening or not. Because we're gonna do this anyway. we're gonna liberate ourselves anyway. Get on board if you want, but the work is happening regardless.
Get on board if you want. There's a t-shirt in there somewhere, sister. Get what you want.
That's what I hope for these spaces. Not that we continue
Borrow
to,
it.
not that we continue to shove ourselves into these spaces where we've been, you're the first black woman solo show. I am the first Black curator at the VAG ever.
I know.
And part of this erasure has a lot to do with the absence of Black people in key decision-making positions. And also our presence, like we keep talking about, you're the only one everywhere you look.
Mm-hmm.
So until we bring people inside and also bring them at the decision-making table, it's always going to be the cycle. So you have
that's got to start from the top down, I mean, have you ever been to Canada Council offices?
Okay, go. Yeah, that's it. Need to say no more.
Yeah. Well, have you ever been to Ottawa? It's like, even, let's forget Canada Council, Ottawa itself. You know what I'm saying? You go to any government office, it's like, wow, we are not represented. I mean, people of color are not represented in our government really that much. I mean, it's sort of starting a bit.
Not enough.
But even within this idea of erasure within art, none of our major institutions host permanent salaried Black employees.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm still a guest. I'm a guest contractor at the VAG, right? Like, I'm a guest contractor at MOA. Like, we have, and I think, Lama, we spoke about this at MOA, the tenured professors in African studies are both European born and raised people. Okay. They are not people of African descent. And so there is this kind of, I think, this understanding or this acceptance, particularly in Canada, that as we approach Black culture production or Black art or Black histories, that it actually can be taken up by anyone. Like, we haven't done the work of saying, it is worth something to us to have Black people at the helm of their own creations, at the helm of their own histories, right? We haven't said that that's important. So we can have Carrie James Marshall here in a gallery that's completely white and not think anything about that, not think about how Black people relate to his work, not think about needing for them to see it. So, for me, it's about the calling in, as you said. Like, if I get in through the door and then I leave that door open for, 50 more people, and that was part of my thing, like, I can come on as a curator, but only if this show can be, 6 or 7 Black artists with me, only if this show can have, 3 other Black curators, only if the programming person that you hired has to be an external Black hire. Like, I'm not going to be tokenized in your institution. Either you're hiring all of us or you're not hiring any of us. Figure it out. That's, and luckily, thank goodness, I've had no one spit in my face, but like, it takes, I think we cannot hope that they will have this like come to Jesus moment without us, right? Nothing has happened that way, right? We've been kicking and screaming and singing and dancing and writing ourselves into these spaces of liberation on our own, right? So that's, I don't know.
So what role is there for allyship? Because we talk about dismantling white supremacy, and it is huge. This work cannot be done by us alone. In fact, we can't do it. We need white people who are holding this power and the privilege to really be part of this transformation. What do you think?
Well, I agree, and I hope that happens. I really do. I think we're kind of coming up to a whole new generation who I
young people
feel have grown. Yeah. I mean, who I feel are starting to see what the problems are. And I have to hope that they're going to step up to the plate and just pick that ball up and carry it farther down the field, because that's what needs to happen. People that are really willing to share power, not just, talk about it.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that the defining moment is when we're willing to stop being performative, right? And what power sharing looks like is meaningful resource sharing, meaningful, like not just passing the mic for a day, for 2 days, for a month, like something that is sustainable. What is your sustainable commitment to Black art so that in 10 years, it is an integrated part of the way that you navigate as a gallery? There will be no first, there will be no, these are the only 3 we have. Like it will be, an almost natural part of the way that we discuss culture, the Canadian art landscape, that this is just simply a part of it, right? Black art becomes our reference points, becomes our, must read critical text if you're an art student, becomes like, what are the ways that you're doing that, building it into curriculum top down? And I can only say that it's requires sacrifice, right? I cannot be a director and you can be a director. Somebody has to quit. One of these allies need to show up in their allyship and sincerely sacrifice and step down and make room.
They really have to make room at the table. That's at the end of the day, that's what has to happen. Really, they have to make room at the table.
And what role for government, either municipal, provincial, and federal, what can we get them to do to change, to support the work you do?
Well, they can get more people of color in the government, and they can get more women in the government. I mean, we kind of go on and we talk about racism, but wow, just the lack of resources and a lack of power still in our Canadian government in terms of women, and women of color.
Women of color, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, we need to get people of color in our government. Have you ever seen any pictures of our government? No, sorry.
Yeah.
You look at it and you go, oh my God, really? Oh my God, it's like they haven't.
Is this all we can do?
It's like there's a tone deafness from a certain top up. There's like, wow, have you heard that things have got to change? And things don't seem to be changing,
I'm wondering if we can open the floor for questions in the audience at this point. It's 7:46. Jorge?
Yeah, I think there's 3 in the Q&A.
Can't see them. What's
just at the bottom of your screen beside chat?
Okay, in the chat.
Participants 33.
Oh, Jorge has typed them into the chat box for us. Do you want me to read them?
Yes, I can't.
Okay.
Maybe public space? No.
So the first question is, are there public spaces in Vancouver that you think could be better adapted for your art?
All right. What do you think?
Well, I think we should be invited equally into all public spaces in Vancouver. So I don't know if I want a specific one. I think we should be invited into all public spaces in Vancouver, and that it should just become a normal course of events.
Agreed.
There's also a question about how do non-Black POCs make space in meaningful ways for our Black peers and colleagues?
Well, get some Black friends. No Black people.
Get to know your neighbors.
Know your neighbors. Get to know their history. Have those conversations. Share your shared whatever, and that's a good first step.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to acknowledge that non-Black POC folks can carry and use and yield white supremacy in the same ways that white people can. This is not a white people thing. When we say whiteness, we don't necessarily mean white people. We mean whoever yields it at whatever time that they're yielding it, which in this province is almost often equally by white and non-Black POC folks. And I think, yeah, how you make spaces to do exactly the same work, it does still require sacrifice. It does still require, we know that there is colorism and all of those other things. There's visibility in certain communities of color that enact anti-Black racism in the same ways that whiteness does. Like, it's still about sharing and it's still about sacrifice, and there's no other special ingredient to that work. It is the same work that we're asking of our white allies and folks who are willing to be allies. And I think, I don't think there's a delineation.
And I think that one of the challenges we face is that people resist learning about Black history. And it's as if you have neighbors, you don't know them, you only find out about them through social media or TV. And when you have barbecues, you never invite them. So you just see them, but you don't know them. And for the life of me, during last year, racial reckoning, finally, the Ministry of Education accepted to include Black history in the curriculum. But they continue to drag their feet to really do the job. They have accepted it, but it's always an excuse. So,
well, that's it.
What's going to take to make the shift? What do we need to do?
Hopefully not more Black death. Hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The truth is that, to your point, folks use the excuse of not knowing. I never knew who Jan Wade was. I just never knew who Jan Wade was. You never thought it was important to diversify the type of art that you were taking in, and that's why you did not know who Jan Wade was. And I did. That is your responsibility to diversify your book list, to diversify your curriculums, to diversify what you're considering to be art, to be fine art, to be well-read art. Like, it's your responsibility to know. And so, because using I didn't know just leads to more dehumanization.
Yes.
That's right. I mean, I didn't know is not an excuse, really. It's just
There's one more question. Do you want me to read it, Lama?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. How do you each approach curating and art making? What are the distinctions, differences, and overlaps or connections, I guess, between myself and Jan?
Jan, go ahead.
Well, I don't really curate, except for my own work.
And I am not an artist.
Yeah. So really, I just, I'm at this point, I'm just focusing on, for my next 50 years, making making art and doing the best I can to really just expand my own means of communicating and what I communicate about, because really, as an artist, it is true. I'm a biracial woman. I grew up in a Black community. I really do think the work that I have done up till now is really important because, hey, I'm carrying the flag for my great grandmother, my grandmother, and all the women in my family and the people in my family who I know went through so much heartache and heartbreak, and just these incredible people whose heads were kind of pushed in the dust in a lot of ways, and my work has been there to raise them up, but I'm a human being. There are so many different things I would like to explore in my work that really aren't really race specific, So, I kind of think of what it's taken to just survive. And if I think, wow, if I'd been able to, expend half of that energy it just took to survive, just think of all that work I could have done with that time and that energy. So I'm just kind of trying at this point to focus on my work, and I will leave it to my curator, my future curator.
Yeah, I was going to say our overlap and our connection is that Jan makes has made and continues to make before I was born. Stunning, important work that encapsulates Black experiences, transatlantic experiences, histories, knowledges, bodies of Black women, and memory. And I obsess over it. That is our overlapping connection. I obsess over it. I write about it. I curate it when I can, and I make sure that it never ever gets forgotten. And that's the way that our practices overlap, as I think is the role of any curator that steps in as an intermediary that is so lucky to hold or to witness artists like Jan in their lifetime. I think, yeah, I'm not an artist. I just get really lucky to spend a lot of time with you.
Awesome. Thank you. There's a clarification here about the question about public spaces wasn't about only special ones being for you. It was meant to ask if you think there are public spaces that could be better used for art. Good clarification. Yeah, and we're almost out of time. Is about 6 minutes left. I want to turn it over to Candy. Maybe she wants to make final remarks. And I want to thank you for your amazing response and engaging insights in our conversation.
Oh, and thank you, Lama. It was a pleasure to have you hosting us.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all so much. We do really appreciate it. I mean, huge thank yous to Lama, Jan, and Nya for being with us today and for all the work that you all do in the community in Vancouver here. We appreciate it. We love seeing it. And thanks to my colleague Jorge for helping out tonight to keep the event running smoothly. Thanks to everyone for attending tonight. We really appreciate that as well. We would love to receive some feedback about this event. As a public institution, we are here for you. So we're going to put a link to the feedback form in the chat, which will take you about a minute to fill out. A couple of events that I want to mention that are coming up next week on Wednesday, April 13th at 7 p.m. Zarka Noise, creator of the CBC series Little Mosque on the Prairie, will be discussing her new book, Jamela Green Ruins Everything. And we're going to put a link to the chat in that one. For that one. And then on Thursday, April 21st at 7 p.m. is Black Legends, Cowboys, and Ranchers in Western Canada. We'll have Cheryl Fogo discussing her NFB animated film about John Ware, one of the first Black cowboys in Alberta. She'll be talking with writer Bertrand Bickersteth about Black life on the prairies. Sounds like we've got some excited Black cowboy fans here. So we're going to put a link in the chat for that as well. If you want to watch the event again, we did record it. It'll be available on VPL's YouTube page. And Jorge's going to also share another link for that. So again, thank you all so much for coming out tonight and supporting this space. And thank you again to Jan, Nya, and Lama. You guys did an amazing job tonight. We're going to leave the event open for a few more minutes so you can click on some of the links. And other than that, we hope you have a good rest of your evening. And I'm going to put up the slides right now. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, Nya. Bye, Lama.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for everyone.